Before me, there was a man who did not fear kings.
In an age when kings bowed before idols carved by human hands, and the people, little by little, forgot the name of the one who had delivered them, a voice began to rise, not in palaces, not in temples, but in the harsh silence of the desert. It was a voice like distant thunder, carrying authority, as if heaven itself had chosen to break the silence. Elijah, the prophet of fire. He did not seek approval, he did not fear kings, and he did not compromise truth. Before a corrupted nation, Elijah became like a line drawn in the sand. On one side, the living God. On the other, everything that had replaced him. He confronted kings, he challenged false prophets, and he cried out to the heavens until the impossible happened. On the heights of Mount Carmel, before the eyes of a divided crowd, he lifted his voice, and fire answered. Flames descended from heaven as a divine response. They consumed the altar, the water, even the stones, an undeniable sign that the God of Israel still reigns. But Elijah's journey was not built on visible miracles alone. It was marked by silent persecution, by flight, by moments of deep solitude, and encounters with the presence of God so intense they could not be described with words. And when his mission reached its peak, he did not taste death like other men. There was no tomb, no mourning. There was fire. A chariot of flame cut through the heavens. Horses like living fire crossed the horizon, and Elijah was taken, alive, beyond human reach, into eternity.
This is not the story of an ordinary man. This is the story of a prophet.
This is the story of Elijah, the prophet of fire.
The land of Israel had been plunged into darkness, spiritual darkness. Its streets, which once echoed with praises to the living God, were now contaminated. Altars dedicated to Baal sprang up like scars on the land. The incense no longer rose to heaven in honor of Jehovah, but mingled with distorted chants, profane dances, and rituals that had nothing holy about them. In the fields, where once the goodness of the Creator was remembered, another cry was heard.
Baal, hear us! Send us rain!
The people had exchanged the source for illusion, the covenant for deception. They called upon a God who promised fertility, but could not answer. And while this happened, the voices of the true prophets were silenced. Not by argument, but by blood. At the center of it all, one figure stood, Jezebel, determined, relentless, with unyielding hands and a hardened heart. She imposed her foreign religion upon the entire nation. And Israel bowed. It was in this moment that he appeared, unannounced, unexpected, like a man shaped by the mountains themselves, rough as the desert, unshaken as the rocks of Gilead. His face, marked by sun and time, carried something uncommon, Not just endurance, conviction. The certainty of one who lives in the presence of the Most High. His steps were not hurried, but they carried weight. Every movement echoed something greater than himself. And then he entered. Through the palace halls, guards glanced at one another confused, yet no one dared stop him. There was something about him that commanded silence without a word. His gaze cut through the room like lightning and stopped before the throne. Ahab, king of Israel. Elijah did not bow. He did not ask permission. He did not soften his words. With a voice stronger than any storm, he declared,
As surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, there will be neither rain nor dew in these years, except by my word.
The effect was immediate. Silence fell like a blow, heavy, sharp. Jezebel's lips tightened. Ahab's face hardened. This was not a warning. It was a decree. The God of rain had been challenged and exposed. The land would close, the heavens sealed, not by human will, but by the word of the living God. And before any command was given, before the guards could react, Elijah was gone, as suddenly as he had appeared.
Who does he think he is to speak to me like that?
I don't know, my lord.
But his words had done more than confront a king. They planted unrest, confusion, and a fear no one dared name. Meanwhile, far from the eyes of the palace, God was leading his prophet into the hidden, into the silence, into a place forgotten by men, the brook of Cherith east of the Jordan.
There, where there were no crowds, no applause, no human witnesses, Elijah learned something deeper: the faithfulness of God in the secret place. The brook flowed quietly between the stones, and with every sunrise and every sunset, something unlikely happened. Ravens, creatures considered unclean, descended from the sky. They landed among the rocks and carried in their beaks bread and meat. Heaven sustained the prophet in a way no one could have imagined. Rejected creatures became instruments of divine provision. Elijah sat by the brook, eating the bread in silent reverence. It was not just food, it was a reminder. The same God who shuts the heavens is the God who sustains his own when everything around them begins to dry. The sound of the water running through the stones grew weaker day after day, more distant, until what once flowed strong became only a thread. Elijah watched, not with despair, but with understanding. The drought was not symbolic. It was not only spiritual. It was real. It moved across the land like a silent judgment, consuming fields, emptying springs, testing hearts. Until finally, the brook dried up. No water, no sound. The provision of that place had come to an end. And then, the voice of the Lord came again, not as a distant echo, but as clear direction. Elijah had to leave. His destination was not Israel. It was Zarephath, a foreign land, Sidon, the very place from which Jezebel had brought the idolatry that corrupted the nation. God did not send him to a king, not to a priest,
not to a powerful man, but to a widow, poor, unknown, and, by every human measure, unable to sustain anyone, much less a prophet. When Elijah arrived, the scene was simple, almost silent. At the entrance of the village, he saw her, bent over, gathering sticks, the last ones. With a steady voice, without harshness, he said,
"Please, bring me some water and also a piece of bread."
As surely as the Lord your God lives, I have no bread.
I only have a handful of flour and a little olive oil. I'm gathering these sticks to prepare our last meal.
There was no drama, only reality, raw, final. But Elijah did not step back, because he was not speaking from himself. Something greater carried his words. Do not be afraid. Those 3 words broke the weight of that moment.
Do as you said, but first, make me a small loaf of bread, and then some for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord says: the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry, until the day the Lord sends rain on the land.
Time seemed to stop. The wind fell silent. The quiet became almost tangible. She stood before a choice between what she could see and what had been spoken, between the logic of scarcity and the possibility of a miracle. Her hands trembled, but she obeyed. And in that silent act of faith, the impossible began. The jar never became empty. The jug never ran dry. Day after day, when her hand reached into the flour, there was still more. When she poured the oil, it flowed. While the land around her was fading, while entire nations felt the weight of famine, inside that simple house, there was bread every day. Not in overwhelming abundance, but in provision. Enough, constant, faithful.
But the work of God was not yet finished, because the faith that is sustained must also be tested. The widow's son fell ill, suddenly, severely, until his breath stopped. The silence of death filled the room, and then the cry, a deep cry, tearing through the air, a mother's pain. And with it, questions, hard questions.
Did you come to me to remind me of my sins and to make my son die?
Faith was now confronted by sorrow. Elijah did not answer with arguments. He acted. He took the child in his arms, carried him upstairs, and laid him on his own bed. There, alone, he cried out, not as one repeating words, but as one pouring out his soul.
Oh Lord, my God, I implore you, give this child back his life.
He stretched himself over the boy, once, twice, 3 times, and with each cry, heaven remained silent, as though all creation was waiting. Until something changed. The lifeless body responded. Breath returned. The chest rose. Life came back. Elijah lifted the boy, carried him downstairs, and placed him in his mother's arms. There was no spectacle, no crowd, only truth. And in that moment, the woman understood.
Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is true.
So began the ministry of Elijah.
with a word that shut the heavens, with ravens that fed him in the wilderness, with a foreign widow who witnessed daily provision, and with a child who returned from death. A prophet without a crown, without an army, without human support, yet sustained by the presence of the eternal God. Because when everything around seems to fall apart, God remains faithful, sustaining those who trust in him. And Elijah learned in Cherith and in Zarephath that the same hand that provides in secret is the same hand that sends him to confront kings. This is how men and women of God are forged, not in palaces, not in applause, but in the fire of testing and in the simplicity of dependence. 3 years, 3 long years of drought had passed over Israel like an invisible weight, yet devastating. The fields produced nothing, dust. The rivers no longer flowed, only cracks split the earth. Cattle staggered and fell beneath the relentless sun. The sky remained closed, still, silent. Baal, the god who claimed to control the rain, said nothing. No clouds, no drops, not even the morning dew dared to appear. Famine spread through the villages like a slow shadow, and still the people did not return to the Lord. Then the voice of God came again to Elijah, clear, direct. "Go, show yourself to Ahab, for I will send rain upon the earth." The one who had been hidden was now called to be revealed. The prophet stepped out of anonymity and walked back into the center of conflict. The encounter came quickly. When Ahab saw Elijah, the man who had shut the heavens with a single word, his eyes burned with anger.
Is it you, the one who troubles Israel?
I have not troubled Israel.
But you and your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals.
This was not just accusation, it was revelation. And then Elijah issued the challenge, a challenge that would echo through generations.
Gather all Israel, and gather on Mount Carmel, the 450 prophets of Baal, and the 400 of Asherah.
There, before everyone, it would be decided, who is God? The day came, and like an unavoidable call, the people ascended. From cities, from villages, from dry fields. Men, women, elders, all gathered to witness something that could not be ignored. The prophets of Baal arrived in grandeur, ritual garments, confident eyes. They moved with the certainty of those who believed they were in control. And Elijah stood alone. No army, no support. Just one man before a multitude. But when he rose, it was like a lion among men.
How long will you waver between two paths? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him.
The people remained silent. No answer, no reaction. Their indecision was visible. 2 altars were prepared, one for Baal, one for the Lord. No human fire, no tricks, no interference. The rule was clear. The God who answers with fire, he is God. The prophets of Baal began, from early morning, crying out, "Baal, answer us!" Their voices echoed through the mountain. They danced, they leaped, they circled the altar in frenzy. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, burning their skin, but no answer came. At noon, Elijah spoke, and his voice cut through the air.
Shout louder. Perhaps he's thinking.
or busy, or traveling.
Some laughed nervously, others shifted uneasily.
Perhaps he is sleeping. Who knows? Maybe he needs to be woken up.
The mockery fed their desperation. They cried louder, more intensely, until they began to cut themselves. Knives, spears. Blood ran down their bodies. But the sky remained silent. No voice, no answer, no one to respond. The altar of Baal remained untouched. Then Elijah called, "Come to me." The crowd drew near, and the contrast was undeniable. No shouting, no frenzy, only reverence. He began by restoring the altar of the Lord that had been broken, stone by stone, 12 stones, one for each tribe of Israel. A reminder, they were still one people, even broken, even lost. He dug a trench around the altar, prepared the wood, placed the sacrifice. And then he did something no one expected. In the middle of a drought, he asked for water. 4 jars poured over the altar, once, twice, 3 times, until everything was soaked. Water ran down, filled the trench. Humanly, there was no chance, no possibility of fire. Elijah raised his arms and prayed. No spectacle, no repetition, only truth.
O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, may it be known today that you are God, and that I am your servant, and that I did all this at your word. Answer me, Lord, so that this people may know that you are God, and that you turn their hearts back.
And then, without warning, without transition, it happened. The fire of the Lord fell, not like an ordinary flame, but like a torrent from heaven. It consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the dust. Even the water vanished before it. Nothing remained. The mountain trembled, the air tore open with the sound of divine fire. And the people fell, face to the ground.
The truth had been revealed.
The Lord is God!
No debate, no doubt. And then Elijah commanded,
You know what to do. Arrest the prophets of Baal. Let none of them escape.
The people, now gripped with conviction, obeyed. The 450 were taken. Led down from the heights of Carmel to the valley, to the brook Kishon, which on that day was nothing more than a dry bed. There, Elijah executed judgment, not as revenge, but as obedience to the law. A judgment against those who had corrupted the nation and led the people into apostasy. Idolatry had been exposed. Truth had fallen in fire, and Israel had witnessed it. But something more was still to come. Elijah did not stop there. While the echo of fire still seemed to linger over Mount Carmel, he climbed higher, alone, away from the crowd, away from the noise, away from visible victory. At the summit, he fell to the ground, face down. There was no celebration. There was intercession. Because the same God who answers with fire is the God who sends rain. Elijah began to pray,
Not once, not quickly, but with persistence, with perseverance, with faith. 7 times he sent his servant to the horizon.
The same God who sent fire will send us rain. Go and see toward the sea.
The servant went, looked, and returned. Once, twice, 3 times, 4, 5, 6.
There is nothing.
Nothing. The sky remained closed. But Elijah did not rise. On the 7th time, the servant returned differently.
Tell me what you saw. I see a small cloud, about the size of the palm of my hand.
It was almost nothing, a minimal sign, nearly invisible. But for Elijah, it was everything. Because faith is not based on the size of the sign, but on the certainty of the promise.
Run! Tell Ahab to prepare his chariot and get down so that the rain does not stop him.
And then the sky changed. Clouds gathered, the wind rose, the dry air grew heavy, and suddenly the rain fell, strong, abundant, unstoppable. The dry ground began to drink again. The fields received life. The silence of drought was broken by the sound of rain. But that rain was more than water. It was restoration. It was answer. It was grace after judgment.
Finally. Rain, thank God.
Mount Carmel had been marked by fire, by water, by revealed truth. The altars of Baal reduced to ashes. The people prostrate, crying out, "The Lord is God." And the rain finally returned after years of silence. Elijah ran, but it was not just a run. It was as if something unseen was driving him forward. As if the very hand of God was pushing him ahead. Ahead of Ahab's chariot, ahead of the impossible. The wind cut across his face, dust rose beneath his feet, and still he did not stop. His heart burned, not only from effort, but from expectation. There was hope, a living flame within him. Perhaps now, after the fire fell from heaven, after the people bowed, after the rain broke the drought, perhaps now everything would change. But when he arrived, when he passed through the gates of the palace, the atmosphere was different. Heavy, cold. As if the presence that filled Mount Carmel was not there. Ahab, still shaken, still trying to comprehend what he had seen, reported everything, every detail. The rebuilt altar, the water poured, the fire from heaven, the people falling face to the ground, the prophets slain, the rain returning to the dry land. But as he spoke, another presence filled the room. Jezebel listened, and her eyes did not reflect repentance.
They burned, not with heavenly fire, but with fury. Like living embers, fed by wounded pride, she would not bow, not to a prophet, not to a sign, not even to God himself. That defeat would not go unanswered. Without hesitation, she sent a message, direct, without symbols, without metaphor. It was a sentence. A messenger departed at once, carrying words that did not hold only threat, but death.
Take this message to him. May the gods punish me, and punish me with all rigor, if by tomorrow, at this hour, I do not do to you what you did to them.
Yes, my queen.
This was no rumor, no politics. It was personal, direct, final. A sentence against Elijah's life, and he heard it. And in that moment, something changed. The man who had confronted kings, who had faced crowds, who had called fire from heaven, now felt something different. The weight. Not the weight of the mission, but the weight of the soul. The pressure, the pursuit, the silence after the miracle. His heart raced, his knees weakened. The exhaustion that had been hidden rose to the surface. Loneliness, tension, emotional weariness, all of it reached him at once. And for the first time, fear spoke louder. Elijah did not respond. He did not confront. He did not call for fire. He ran. He left behind his servant, left behind the place of victory, and went alone, south, into the wilderness. That same wilderness where God speaks, but also where a man faces his limits. The sun burned. The silence was absolute. Each step heavier than the last. Until, without strength, he stopped. Under the fragile shade of a broom tree, there, the prophet of fire collapsed, exhausted, empty.
Enough, Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors.
It was the cry of a man who had won outwardly, but was broken within. Public victory revealed private loneliness. But God did not let him fall. While Elijah slept, a touch, gentle, an angel awakened him.
Get up and eat.
Beside him, bread baked over coals, fresh water, provision in the wilderness. He ate, he drank, and lay down again. And once more, the touch.
Rise and eat, man of faith, for the journey is too long for you.
It was not only food for the body, it was grace, it was care. It was God sustaining a man who could no longer sustain himself. Strengthened, Elijah rose, and he walked. One day, then another, and another, until days became weeks, 40 days, 40 nights, until he reached the mountain of God, Horeb, the place where heaven and earth seemed to meet. There, he entered a cave and hid. Not from men, but from himself. Still carrying the weight, still carrying the sense of failure. And then, the voice came, not distant, but near.
Elijah, what are you doing here?
I feel a burning zeal for you, Lord. Your altars have been destroyed, your prophets have been killed, and I am the only one left, and they seek to take my life.
Then the Lord brought him to the entrance of the cave and told him to watch. Something was about to happen, something that would mark his soul forever. First came the wind, violent, relentless, tearing through the mountains, shattering rocks, sweeping everything in its path. The sound was deafening. But the Lord was not in the wind. Then the earth shook. An earthquake shattered the ground. The earth split open. The stones broke apart, as if creation itself was collapsing. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. Then came the fire. Intense, consuming. The flames danced as they had on Carmel, like a living altar. But the Lord was not in the fire. And then, after the chaos, after the noise, after the force, came silence. And in the silence, a whisper, soft, gentle, almost imperceptible, yet impossible to ignore. It was not a sound that frightened. It was a presence that surrounded, a voice that did not crush, but restored. And in that moment, Elijah understood. The wind, the earthquake, the fire. These were how man imagines God. Power, strength, judgment, visible greatness. But God was revealing something deeper, that He is not found only in what impresses, not only in what destroys, not only in what shakes the earth, but also in what speaks to the heart. When Elijah heard the whisper, he stopped. His entire being responded. Without seeing, he knew God was there. Not in the wind that tore the mountains, not in the earthquake that shook the earth, not in the fire that consumed everything, but in what is barely heard, in what does not force, but invites. Then Elijah covered his face with his mantle, not out of fear, but out of reverence, and he stepped out. Every movement was different now, slower, more aware. There was the true presence of God, not in violence, but in a tenderness that transforms the heart. And there, a silent truth was established. The power of God does not always come with noise. Sometimes it comes as a whisper, intimate, personal, deep. Once again, the voice asked, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And once again, the prophet opened his soul. No masks, no strength, only truth. The loneliness was still there. The pain was still there. But now, God was there too. And then, the answer came, not as rebuke, but as direction, as hope, as restoration. You are not alone. Those words echoed beyond the moment. There were, and still are, 7,000 in Israel who have not bowed down to Baal.
7,000. While Elijah believed he was the last, heaven had already preserved a remnant, faithful, silent, unshaken. And more than that, there was still a mission.
You will. And each word seemed to rekindle something within him. You will anoint kings. You will overthrow empires. You will execute my judgment. But then, something even deeper. You will raise up prophets. The voice wasn't just restoring the present, it was building the future. Call Elisha, son of Shaphat, a name that until then meant nothing, but which carried continuity. He will inherit your mantle. The mantle, a symbol of authority, of calling, of legacy. Elijah had asked to die, but God was multiplying his life. His ministry would not end there. It would continue through another. The flame would not go out. It would be passed on. The prophet who thought he was alone discovered that heaven was already moving, preparing successors, organizing the unseen. And what began with fire on Carmel would not end in the silence of the desert. It would continue beyond him, far beyond. But while heaven was setting its plans, on earth, another story was unfolding. Ahab, a man of palaces, of wealth, of power, set his eyes on something small, a vineyard, beside his palace in Jezreel. It belonged to a simple man, Naboth. But that vineyard was not just land. It was inheritance. It was identity. It was promise passed down through generations, a sacred symbol of belonging. Ahab desired it, as if it were ordinary, as if everything could be bought. He offered exchange. He offered value. But Naboth answered, firm, unshaken.
So, you accept? Not my king. May the Lord forbid me from giving you the inheritance of my ancestors.
It was not stubbornness. It was faithfulness. Faithfulness to the law. Faithfulness to the covenant. But Ahab did not understand. He returned to the palace, angry, defeated, like a powerful man unable to deal with a no. He lay down, turned his face to the wall, refused to eat. The king of Israel, reduced to the silence of frustration. And then Jezebel entered. And when she saw him, her eyes showed no compassion. They showed contempt.
Are you the king of Israel? Then get up, eat and be merry. I will give you Naboth's vineyard.
But what she offered was not a solution. It was a crime. Jezebel acted without hesitation, without conscience. Letters were written in the name of the king, sealed with authority, sent to the leaders of the city. And the order was clear: a staging, a fast, an assembly, an accusation. Naboth would be placed in the spotlight, not to be honored, but to be condemned. Two men, wicked, would be the witnesses, false, and the lie was proclaimed as truth.
It was him, that man. He blasphemed against God and against the king. He deserves to be punished.
The crowd reacted, not with discernment, but with fury, driven by power. They dragged Naboth outside the city, and there, under the weight of stones, life was taken. Silently, unjustly, definitively. Jezebel received the news without emotion, without guilt, only efficiency.
Rise, my king. Take possession of Naboth's vineyard, which is now yours, for he is no longer alive.
The king went down, confident, to take what never belonged to him, not knowing that heaven had already responded. Elijah was coming, the man of the wilderness, of the rough mantle, of the cutting word. He appeared in the vineyard, and his presence interrupted the moment, like thunder in an open sky. Ahab stopped, and there the confrontation happened, not between two men, but between a king and the justice of God.
Ahab, son of Omri, king of Israel, you killed and also took possession?
Truly I tell you, in the very place where dogs licked up Naboth's blood, dogs will lick up your blood, yes, yours.
Silence fell over the vineyard, heavy, dense. Ahab trembled. The man who bowed before Jezebel now trembled before God.
So you found me, my enemy?
I found you because you sold yourself to do evil in the eyes of the Lord.
I will destroy your descendants. I will bring evil upon you. The dogs will devour Jezebel.
Every word carried eternal weight. The vineyard, that should have been a place of life, was now a stage of judgment. Where there should have been harvest, there was condemnation. The scriptures say, there was never a king like Ahab, who sold himself to do evil, driven by Jezebel. Evil had ceased to be an exception. It had become a system, politics, law. But even in the midst of this empire of corruption, one voice remained. A man with a simple mantle, but with an authority no throne could surpass. And he rose to declare that there is no power on earth greater than the judgment of the Most High. The message struck Ahab like an invisible sword, piercing not only his ears, but the deepest part of his spirit. The king, the one who had hardened his heart so many times, now broke. He tore his garments before everyone, put on sackcloth, fasted, and walked in humility, like someone who had finally understood the weight of his own sin. And the Lord, rich in mercy, looked upon that humiliation, not as a performance, but as a sign. So the judgment was restrained, not canceled, but delayed. It would not come upon him, but upon his descendants. For God is just, but also patient. And in that heavy silence, a truth echoed like restrained thunder. The voice of the prophet does not bow to crowns, is not intimidated by thrones, does not negotiate with power. When kings corrupt themselves, God raises voices, voices that tear through comfort, that expose sin, that remind that the earth does not belong to men, but to the Lord. The vineyard of Naboth, that small piece of land stained with blood, became more than an injustice. It became a testimony, an eternal sign that no act of violence goes unnoticed, that innocent blood cries out and is never forgotten in heaven.
Time passed, and as so often happens in history, a new king arose, but not a new heart. After the death of Ahab, his son Ahaziah took the throne, and with him came the repetition of the same errors, the same idols, the same crooked paths, the same provocation against the God of Israel. It was as if the lessons of the past had been buried with the dead. Then, on an ordinary day, without warning, destiny reached him. Ahaziah fell from the window of his room in Samaria. The impact was violent. His body was broken, fragile, on the edge of death. And in that moment, when any man would seek heaven, he looked to the wrong place. Instead of crying out to the Lord, he commanded,
Go and consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron. Ask him if I will recover.
It was not just a decision, it was a defiance, a direct insult to the living God. The King of Israel, called to lead the people in truth, now sought answers from a foreign idol. But before those messengers reached their destination, heaven had already responded. The angel of the Lord spoke to Elijah, and the prophet, once again, rose, without hesitation, without fear. He intercepted the messengers on the road and declared,
Is there no God in Israel? And why do you go to consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron?
Then take this message to the king. You will not get down from the bed you climbed onto. You will surely die.
The messengers returned sooner than expected, and when he saw them, Ahaziah questioned them. And they told everything, every word, every detail. They described the man who had stopped them on the road, a man covered with hair, with a leather belt around his waist. And when he heard, the king's face tightened. He knew, there was no doubt.
It's him! It's Elijah the Tishbite! Who does he think he is? Call the captain of the royal guard!
The same voice, the same prophet, the same God. Consumed with anger, he sent a captain with 50 soldiers to bring Elijah by force. They found him on the top of a hill, sitting, still, like a man who had nothing to flee from.
Elijah, man of God! The king commands you to come down immediately!
And Elijah answered, without raising his voice, without haste,
If I am a man of God, may fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men.
And in that instant, heaven answered. Fire fell, violent, irresistible, and consumed them. But the king's heart still had not learned. A second group was sent, harsher, more arrogant.
Elijah, man of God, come down right now! The king of Israel commands you to come with us!
And Elijah, with the same firmness, answered again. And the fire fell once more, like a seal from heaven. Even then, Ahaziah persisted. A third captain was sent, but this one did not come with commands. He came with fear. He knelt before the prophet and pleaded,
Elijah, man of God, I implore you, spare my life and the lives of these men.
He understood. This was not merely a human confrontation. It was heaven responding to earth. Then the angel of the Lord spoke to Elijah.
Elijah, go down with him. Do not be afraid.
And Elijah went down, not as a prisoner, but as a messenger. Standing before the king, he repeated, without changing a single word,
This is what the Lord says.
because you sent messengers to consult Baal, and not the God of Israel. You will not get up from the bed you are lying on. You will surely die.
And so it happened. Ahaziah died, according to the word of the Lord, without delay, without error, exactly as it was spoken. And the story echoes like a warning through the ages. God does not share his glory with idols. No throne, no crown, no human authority can rise above heaven. The same fire that fell on Carmel fell again, not only to judge, but to confirm. Elijah did not speak for himself, but as the voice of the Most High. After hearing the voice of God at Horeb, not in the wind, not in the earthquake, nor in the fire, but in the whisper, Elijah understood. It was not just a momentary realization, it was a deep breaking. There, in that silence that pierces the soul, he perceived something greater than his own pain. His journey was not yet finished. The calling was not only to confront kings, nor to tear down altars, but to build continuity, to ensure that the flame would not go out with his departure. For the work of God does not end in one man. It continues.
It stretches like a river that never runs dry, flowing through time, breaking through generations. And in that silence, heavy with purpose, a mission was given to raise successors, men who would not only hear, but carry the weight of the presence, men who would sustain the flame when his voice would fall silent. Among them, a name was called, Elisha, son of Shaphat, a common man, without titles, without recorded history, but about to be marked by the extraordinary. And then the day came, not with signs in the heavens, nor with grand announcements, but with the simplicity that so often accompanies the movements of God. Elijah went out, without noise, without announcement, only obedience. Each step carried purpose, even without witnesses. And he found Elisha in the field, plowing the land with 12 yoke of oxen. The sound of the plow breaking the soil, the smell of freshly turned earth, the constant labor under the sun, the weight of work, the repetitive rhythm of ordinary life. Everything seemed the same as every other day. Another day of routine, another day of silent effort. But that day was not ordinary. It was the day when the invisible would touch the visible. Then, along the path, Elijah appeared, walking in silence, without haste, without hesitation, like someone who knows exactly what must be done. No speeches, no explanations, just a gesture. He took his mantle and cast it upon Elisha's shoulders. And in that instant, time seemed to stand still. Everything changed, because it was not just a garment. It was a calling. It was a transfer. It was the invisible weight of God's presence resting upon a new man. It was the continuation of a story that could not be interrupted. Elisha understood, without words, without doubt, as if something within him awakened irreversibly. He left the plow and ran after the prophet.
Let me just say goodbye to my parents. Go.
There was urgency, but also honor. He did not want to leave without acknowledging his roots. Elijah answered with few words, but enough. For when God calls,
There is no need for long explanations. Elisha returned home, and before those who had raised him, declared,
"Father, Mother, today I must answer God's call."
There was firmness in his voice, but also awareness of the cost. It was not a light decision. It was final. He took the wood of the plow and turned it into fire. He sacrificed the oxen, prepared food, and gave it to the people. A simple act, but filled with meaning. It was more than a gesture. It was a breaking point. It was an altar raised from the remains of his former life. It was a severing from the past. No return, no backup plans, no way back. And from that day on, Elisha walked beside Elijah, not only as a disciple, but as a man in process, learning, observing, serving, absorbing not only words, but the spirit of the mission. As time moved forward, silent but inevitable, like a clock no one sees, but that never stops. Until the day came, the day when heaven would come to take him. They departed from Gilgal, walking together. Each step now carried farewell. They passed through Bethel, through Jericho, and in every place Elijah would say,
"You must stay here, my son. I don't want you to carry the weight of what is to come."
As if testing him, as if preparing him, as if deep down trying to spare him.
But Elisha remained firm, without retreating, without hesitating, not out of stubbornness, but out of faithfulness, out of love, out of conviction. Then they came to the Jordan, the boundary, the point of transition, the place where stories change. Elijah took his mantle, folded it, and struck the waters. The waters parted as if recognizing the authority of that act, and both crossed on dry ground, like in ancient days, like a living echo of the God who does not change, now repeating before new eyes. On the other side, the moment came. The silence grew heavier.
"Tell me, my son, what you want me to do for you before I am taken away."
I ask you, my Lord, for a double portion of your spirit.
It was not ambition. It was responsibility. It was the recognition that what was coming would require more. It was the desire to continue and to go further. As they walked, suddenly heaven opened, not as a spectacle, but as a divine intervention. A chariot of fire with horses of fire came down between them, separating master and disciple. And then Elijah was taken in a whirlwind, rising, being carried, disappearing into the heavens.
My father! My father! The chariots of Israel and their horsemen!
His cry tore through the silence, filled with grief and honor. His eyes followed until he could see no more. Silence, absence, the emptiness of departure. But then, something fell. The mantle, the same mantle, now before him, as an answer, as a confirmation. Elisha tore his garments, mourning but also transition. The end of one phase, and the beginning of another. He took the mantle in his hands, now not as a spectator, but as a bearer, and he returned to the Jordan. Each step carried decision. He stood before the waters, lifted the mantle, and declared,
"Where is the God of Elijah?"
They parted again, because it was never about Elijah. It was about God. And he crossed, no longer as a servant, but as a prophet. The sons of the prophets watched from a distance, witnesses of a moment unseen by natural eyes, and they recognized it. The spirit of Elijah now rested upon Elisha. Thus began a new story, a new season, a new voice. For God does not choose only the strong, nor the most prepared. He chooses the available, those who are willing to leave everything, to obey without reserve. Elisha left the plow and began to divide rivers, not by his own strength, but by obedience. The mantle that fell upon him was not just a garment, it was the beginning of a life marked by the presence of God. Elijah, the prophet of fire, was taken into heaven, but the fire did not go out, because the mantle was passed, and in the hands of Elisha, a new era began.